Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diaries. Dear Diary, welcome world, welcome to the Indigo Diaries, and welcome to our series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about neurodivergency through others and our own experiences. And yet again, I'm really happy. This is actually the second podcast I'm recording today, which is, I don't think I've ever done 2 in one day before, and it's really exciting because I just love having conversations. And I'm not even going to introduce this person because she's been back many times. So this is Holly, but she does deserve a recognition. So I'm going to, Holly, welcome back. And massive topic that we talked about last time. So we decided to kind of do this in 3 parts because it was just such a massive topic of boundaries. So welcome back, Holly.
Thank you. As always, it's just so fun to be here and get to have these conversations with you.
Today we're going to kind of do an open mind session where we're going to talk about something that comes really in place with certain boundaries that we kept noticing last week. Where we're really going to talk about it and then kind of open the door to kind of give you those practical things to kind of think about. Before we kind of dig into kind of RSD and people pleasing, I just want to take us back about what we talked about last time. We left you with kind of something to go and have a look around and go and do. And we kind of said that reflection about go and look in your own life, think about your own boundaries, you know, what's coming to you and what are you putting out there. I just wanted to see, Holly, if you had any other thoughts around that.
I think self-reflection and self-awareness is a really important part of this process. So even if you listen to the first one and haven't had a chance to do that, you can even pause us for just a minute and just kind of think about what comes up for you and where you're noticing some discomfort.
Yeah, because that was the first part, right? Was the self-awareness around where are your boundaries? Where are you not meeting your boundaries? What's not going on? So if you've not done that, that's okay. You know, you turn up and accept, that's fine. But if you want to do pause now, you can do that to talk about that. But something we noticed, a massive thing in setting boundaries, a huge part of it was rejection and people pleasing. And kind of, so RSD is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So Holly, what would you say RSD is?
There's lots of definitions out there, but I would say it's like a triggered emotional and probably for some also physical pain or reaction after some sort of perceived rejection. And I would say it's a really, really intense sensitivity to that perceived rejection.
And I wanted to go kind of put in the kind of neurodivergent lens there of like RSD is a huge thing that comes with, and it's not like, please don't, there's no like, you can't get diagnosed with RSD. There's still little to scientific research. So there's a lot more coming out, but it's still quite unknown. But with this happens for everybody, like a lot of people, you don't have to be neurodivergent just to kind of trigger RSD. But with neurodivergence, because we have that heightened sensitivity and because we live in a world that's not neurodivergent friendly, then, you know, I talked last time about 20,000 more negative thoughts by the age of 12. That just makes the RSD more kind of at the forefront of our lives and more intense versus, you know, everybody has experiences that perceived rejection because it's a traumatic response, but it's just that with neurodivergency, it is a lot, can be a lot more intense and a bit more prevalent in, I would say, most clients that I see.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. And I think what we're going to get into a little bit here is that as a result of that anticipation or anxiety about potential rejection, behavior starts to be modified before there's even communication. So there's a lot of this thinking and feeling that's already kind of building up in intensity before there's even an interaction as a way to try to prevent, you know, proactively prevent this either actual or perceived rejection that takes place.
I think the word that keeps coming up for me, what you were saying, and just what I'm thinking, is perception. You know, a perception is something that we perceive as happening, but that doesn't mean it's actually happening. I think that's really interesting. What do you think?
I do. I think we all have a lens that we view the world through. And I think what can be tricky is two people can have a completely different experience of the same scenario. I do want to be clear, there's the difference between being told the truth or the actual truth, but in terms of how a person walks through that experience and the emotions and the story that they tend to lean into can be very different. So when we say perceived rejection, it's absolutely not meant as a form of invalidating. It's just a way of making us aware of the lens that we're viewing the world through, or heightened sensitivity to certain things.
Yeah, like the rejection is there for a reason, but it's just that it might actually not be what is actually happening, and I think it long history of facing rejection, it's a trauma response, but I think this thing of it is a response that makes you go into that fight or flight, and we'll put some stuff around about that downstairs, but like you said there, because we've had rejection, we anticipate it more, which means our lens and our perception is heightened, which means we're actually going to feel rejection a lot more than we actually probably are rejected.
Yes, and I think there's just an anticipation that it's going to happen, which is such an anxious and exhausting way to live if you're approaching every scenario with thinking about how you're going to save yourself or defend yourself from that possible rejection. It kind of makes me think, we've talked about masking and just how absolutely exhausting and draining that is to constantly be anticipating and bracing and preparing, and then all of this emotional energy that's going into preparing and being proactive also leads to being depleted, and then not having all the emotional resources you need to stay emotionally regulated. So it's kind of this cycle that happens,
and that's hard to get out of, right? We're rejected at some point in our life. We then oh no, we don't want to feel like that again, and then we've got this lens of reject. It's almost like like back not those superhero films where they've got that lens and it's like they see a person, it's like rejection. It's almost like that, and someone does something, someone says something, or someone looks at you the wrong way, and it's like, oh, it reminds me back then. Your brain goes ding ding ding, rejection to back then, but it's not back then. And then but what we've talked about before is this thing of that then makes people mask. It makes people then people please and behave in a way that you don't actually need or want to behave.
Right. Absolutely. It takes a lot of work to do that. And that's why, you've heard me say it so many times, that self-awareness, that self-reflection, understanding your story. So you don't need to jump back into your story and stay there or keep going back there. It's important to go back to understand how it's shaping the lens and how you're viewing the world and the relationships and the work and everything that you're living in on a day-to-day basis, because we all have, like I said before, we all have a leaning to taking in information in a certain way. And our brains, if we're used to, if someone's brain and emotions are used to those negative messages, then that's what you're going to start leaning into and having that filter and getting used to and preparing. It's hard then to see that something could come your way that could actually be positive or welcoming or encouraging.
Yeah. And I always on my course I used to say that like negative thoughts are like sticky notes. They're a lot stickier, and then like positive things are more like just paper, so a lot more sticky. And then if we're thinking about through the neurodivergence / not neurodivergent, it's like neurodivergence, the negative are more sticky because our focus is more on it.
So it makes us more prone to it and harder to take the sticky notes off. And it's that thing of, if you've got that lens, it's hard to see the other way. So a lot of behavior I see with clients is they almost lose a sense of self and overdo things and like try and people please, so that, because like you said earlier, that anticipation of rejection, we just don't want that. So we're almost trying to avoid that feeling. So we will do anything we can to please other people to the extent of ourselves.
Yes, and then we were talking about this just before we started recording, but that cycle that happens then. So there, you're struggling with sense of self, you're taking cues from others around you that external validation, oh, I am valuable, or I'm needed. And then you're doing all these things to please people, juggling. I just picture someone juggling all these plates in the air, but you can't keep up with all of it. So inevitably there's going to be some sort of crash, which is usually some sort of damage to your work or your health or relationships. And then you find yourself in the very scenario that you were working to avoid in the first place. So it's just this cycle that I see individuals can get caught up in. So
and like you said, and then when you've in that cycle, then it becomes more, and the more you go on and on and on, the more your perception or your view comes even more kind of skewed, or lens becomes stronger, because the more time you've had it, the more evidence you have that this is the way it needs to be, when, you know, all we're doing, like we said last week, is that you know, almost like our boundaries and all that are liquid, because we don't know what we need, because our perceptions are usually we're putting everybody else first.
And there's exhaustion in there, and then there's nothing in there about identifying your own needs and how to meet those, or how to ask for others to help you with those, whether it's, you know, in the workplace, socially, you know, personally at home. So it's just this cycle that leads to depletion. And I think I have seen that sometimes clients begin to feel resentful when the boundaries aren't there because their needs aren't going met, but there's not always that awareness that that's what's going on, or there's maybe not even awareness that there are needs in the first place. So just identifying those as well.
And that's what we talked about last time, wasn't it, about being, where are you feeling the discomfort, because that's when you know that it's an unmet need or something. And that's what, so taking that when we're talking about this is, you know, where are you people, you know, because people pleasing, you know, like we said last week, is you say yes to someone else, but you say no to yourself. And it's that thing of, a lot of us feel uncomfortable with people pleasing. It makes us more tired, it because we're using all of our kind of energy on the wrong things that we need, just in order to try and avoid the people pleasing. But then that can create that discomfort. So that's where that awareness key comes in, what we talked about last week, of kind of your little activity to go and do is to almost bring that awareness in here.
And so I think this is also a good time to, I know, Natasha, we just wanted to say that we're approaching this topic, which is a really heavy and wide and broad topic. We're approaching this from our coach lens, and there is and can be a very therapeutic nature of that. So we're speaking from our coach seats today, and from our experiences with our clients, and from what we've observed. And we do encourage you to listen and take in what makes sense, and then, you know, consider additional support if something is really, you know, touching on a subject for you.
So if this is, any of this is triggering, then please, you know, this is not any medical advice. Please go and you know, find people that can help with the lot deeper stuff. We, you know, we're doing the very service level of what it is, and in the second half, in a minute, we're going to be, in a minute, we're going to be talking about what we can do, but as more of a coach lens than another lens. So I think, well, that's a good time to take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to be doing that kind of open the mind, where we're really going to be discussing things that we can do or things that can be done to kind of help the self-awareness and build that to really, you know, kind of, it's not stopping the lens, it's more of trying to wipe the lens and try and see what the lens actually is. So we'll be back and we're out. If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out. And we're back. And before the break, we were talking about RSD and rejection and people pleasing. It's such a big topic. I just want to reiterate that we're not professionals, therapists. So if you feel like you need something more, please go and seek that out. But we're looking this from more of a coaching lens and moving forward with it. And something we were talking about in the start was this lens, and obviously last week we talked about how, you know, noticing where the lens is coming up, you know, what areas of your life the lens is. But then today, I think what we want to talk about is when that lens is there, when the discomfort is there, what do we do with it?
And that is the big questions. And that's really, it comes back to being, to maybe even getting some support to identify what your specific lens is. And then identifying, are you viewing the world through a lens of fear of rejection? So is what you're doing fear-based to prevent actual or perceived rejection? And then the experience of that is so intense that it just feels intolerable. So there's just an individual is doing everything they can to avoid that. So I think it's good to be able to ask yourself questions to reflect, or if this is in the context of like a work scenario or a social or personal relationship, to try to have some questions in mind to ask to get clarification, so you're not approaching this based on assumption or solely through your own lens.
And I think that's really quite crucial, like, you know, is looking at it from other, and that's a really great way to do it, you know, is asking other people what their clarification, to see other perspectives, you know, and stuff like that, and being able to do that, because sometimes our brain, to get out of that emotion, we need evidence, right? So sometimes if we do it ourselves, it can be quite hard to asking other people's perceptions or what that can really help. But obviously, you know, if it's a coach or you know, whatever it is, you know, even someone like that, or a friend, you know, talking to her about the situation, seeing what her view is, go to your mom, or, you know, someone that's safe, and going to them and really, you know, asking them what they think about it is a really good first step. You know, I'm noticing this is happening, you know, she said this, you know, because they won't have your brain in your lens. They may have a different lens, and that can also hopefully open up your own lens.
Yes, I agree. I think it's important to remember that as strong as a person's lens is, the other person or people, if we're talking a team in a work setting or something, every other person likely has a lens that's equally as strong, that's affecting their intake of information and their perception of what's going on. So it can be good to just pause and step back a little bit, kind of zoom out. And even if you don't have the capacity in the moment to think about the other lenses of the people, to just be aware that there's different perceptions happening. There's different ways of processing information.
Yeah. And we talked about earlier about that kind of fight, flight, freeze, and doing it in the moment is not the time, because when we're in that fight, flight, freeze, it's like it's going to be really hard to see it from other perspectives, because emotions will be the thing that's acting, and the trauma or whatever is brought, that rejection and that lens up, is there for a reason. So reflecting on this afterwards, when you have regulated, when you have time in safe space, a safe environment, is really crucial, because that's when you're really going to get the best answers and the way to really be able to either change that lens or that perspective, because it's, because then we're acting from a place where we're not emotionally driven as much, and we're going to be able to be more centered and be more ourselves. And I think that's really key. We've got to have that safety when we're doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know too, if you know you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be pressured, or there's going to be high emotions, and you know about yourself that your tendency is going to be to not honor and respect your own boundaries or your own needs, to have something like a freeze or something that will just buy you a little bit of time so that you can think. So just kind of putting, if you're asked to do something or pressure to do something, just having kind of an answer in your back pocket, or a response that's polite and kind and professional, but also just buys you a little time, as you said, to get out of that emotionally and situation, and be able to really think clearly a little bit later on about what you can do or are willing to do.
Like after the situation, or mine is always, can I ever think about that and I'll get back to you, or I need to check my diary, because no one can ever I need to check my diary because no one ever, or I need to go to the toilet, like whatever it is, just to kind of escape from the situation, to be able to do that. Or later on, and come back to it the next work day. You don't need to respond to emails straight away. It's what can you do just to kind of create space so that you are in the right space to kind of think through. And then
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Karen, you go.
I'm thinking too that, and we were chatting about this too, that boundaries we often think of as needing to say no more, but it's also about saying yes. So if you're approached with something and you need to buy time before you're saying yes, like if you're saying yes to too much in your possible people pleasing lens or approach, it's okay to even pause on saying yes to something. It doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. In a lovely way can just be to say, thank you so much for the invitation, or thank you for thinking of me, and I still need to, I need to check my calendar, or I need to, so it's not always about saying no to things that are draining. It's also just pausing and making sure that you have room in your life for that yes as well.
And knowing that you really want to do it, rather than this lens of, I need to make everyone happy. Or so then we've talking about this creating space when you need to think about it. We've talked about, when you feel the discomfort, or when you feel excited as well, then being able to pause, get out of the situation, maybe talk about it with people. But what about actually kind of separating the lens from, kind of what's going on for you?
Yeah, I think that's so. And we were talking about one of your teachers in your coach training program. I think it's
Caroline McGuire.
Yeah, and her 4 R's, which I think just kind of sums everything up so nicely. Recognize. So we've talked about recognizing, like paying attention to that lens, and then responding, which we've talked about as kind of pausing, whether it's a yes or a no, reflecting, and then thinking, as you've said, that reframe. So what other meaning might there be to what's going on in the situation? Is there possibly another way to look at what's happening?
And like recognize, we talked about last week, responding is that's creating the space, and then reflecting on it, right? Whether it's with someone else, by yourself, in a journal. One of my coaches always says, what's the story and what's the fact? What is the facts here, and then what are your perceptions? Because that separating that can really help you to identify, what is, something happened, what is it, and then what, and then that can then help you to then reframe what does it actually mean, you know, okay, it means this, okay, so if it means this, I thought it was this, but it's actually this, you know, then we know where to kind of advocate or move forward with it then.
Yes, and when you talk about that, I'm thinking, I think it's really important to highlight too that that's work that you do when you're in a calm and kind of regulated state within your nervous system. That's not the kind of work that you want to take on and try to do if you're, you know, in fight, flight, or freeze. You just won't have the availability of your brain to think through and to process all of that. So that's usually best done outside of the scenario after you're feeling like you're in more of a regulated state.
Yeah. So I feel like that recognize and respond is almost in the moment, you know, recognize feeling that way, responding in a way to create space. And then that reflect and reframe is done afterwards when you are regulated. That's a really nice way of putting it. And something that's coming up for me here is that, so I'm going to give you an example of how we might do this. I think that's always a good, so I don't know, I'm going to give you my typical example when what was always mine was, so I had a situation that I used to get a lot where people would, you know, that I'd be talking to them and then they wouldn't ask any further questions, or they wouldn't really, it didn't seem like they were really interested in what I was saying and was listening. So I recognized in the moment when that happens, it actually happened a couple of days ago, and I was talking to my partner and he just was seemed to be preoccupied and didn't really ask anything. And then I recognized that it was making me feel really uncomfortable and I didn't really like it. So I responded with kind of finished my sentence and then was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go. I've got to go back to work. And, you know, so then I moved away. And then later on, because I wasn't in that moment, I reflected and it was like, what are the facts here? I was talking to him at 12 p.m. when he was trying to work about something that he wasn't focused on, right? What was the story? The story is that I'd created this thing that he wasn't listening because he didn't want interested in what I'm saying. But the fact is, the facts were, it was 12 o'clock, he was busy, I was really excited about something and I wanted a response to be more positive. And I reframed it as, it was just the wrong timing. It's not a reflection on me. Yes, I know that when I was younger, people didn't listen and people used to get bored of me, but that's not who he is. You know how many times you've had this. So then later on, I went back and told him the same thing after we both finished work. And he was very responsive, was asking questions. So this is a really good example of, in that moment, I could have gone, oh, well, he doesn't want to listen, blah, blah, blah. And then I wouldn't have had that response later on. And it's not that my lens was not doing me, you know, trauma response is trying to tell us something, it's trying to give us something, but it excuses from what actually is happening.
I just think that is such the perfect example, because it demonstrates too that you've been doing a lot of your own self-reflection and thinking about the lens that you're viewing, and then you were really able to tell yourself the truth in that situation too.
Yeah.
And then kind of step away, do that work on your own, and then step back in at a later time when you're both regulated to check the facts, to check that it was true.
Yeah, and so what I've done is we've put the links for that kind of for ours, and also a worksheet that is very similar to that, which is a more CBT approach, but I use it a lot in coaching, and also some other things where we found about the fight or flight and freeze, you know, and all this sort of stuff. But what we want you to kind of go away with this week is to, in a safe space, we kind of want you to do that we talked about last week about recognizing those feelings. So we kind of want you to think about what an example of where that came up and kind of reflect and reframe it coming up. Or if you get it this week coming up, recognize it, create the space, and then reflect and reframe. But if you kind of those first two are very, you know, more reactive. So, you know, reflecting and reframing on one of those situations and just have a go at, what are the facts? What are the stories? What did it make you feel? What do you actually think is going on? Talk about it with someone, with your coach, with a person you feel safe, and just see what happens.
And I'm just sitting here thinking too, Natasha, reflecting on the first podcast we did together about mindfulness, and there's just so much of this that connects to that, to just giving yourself that pause, that time to give a regulated response rather than a reaction. And so much of that applies to this scenario that we're talking about too.
Yeah. I think that's really nice. Yeah. This is being mindful, right? It's being present in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So try the 4 hours, try and reflect and reframe. If you need someone else there to help you do that, that's okay, because this is hard stuff, especially when we've had years and years of negative things and built things. It's hard stuff. So really take your time with it. Yeah. Any last thoughts, Holly?
This is a big topic, and I'm so glad that we have the time and the space to go through this today. And I'm looking forward to part 3, where we can just talk a little bit more about how this might actually play out, and really think about how to put some of this into place.
Yeah. I really like this. It's been really nice, to give you the first part, the second part, and the third part. We're going to be talking about a lot about boundaries and self-advocacy. So once you've reframed, then how do you go back to a situation and change it? Because that first was the noticing the discomfort, then it's the reflecting, reframing, and then it's what do I do with this now? So really have a think about how, and hopefully next week we'll start to build on that. So my last thoughts of this is hard stuff. Our brains, someone said to me that a trauma response is a very intelligent process. If you think your brain goes through a response, has a really negative experience, but then tries to help you cope with it, it's a very intellectual and very, thought out process to go through. So please don't think because you have a lot of rejection or you sense it's a bad thing for you. Your brain's just worked a lot harder, and it's worked a lot harder. Why? To protect you. And it's hard to then take that protection because it's unsafe. So please, if you need a coach or that, please go and reach out for that. You don't have to do this alone. But when you do start to unpeel it, it is so relieving. And that's what we're just trying to do here.
I just really love what you said about protection. These parts of ourselves are created when there's a trauma response or as a way to protect ourselves. So it doesn't necessarily mean we need to reject it. It's there as a messenger, and there's something really important to learn from it. So just because that's going on doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or we need to push it away. In fact, it's the opposite of, oh, this part is really trying to protect me. Let me pay attention and figure out what I need to understand about this.
I love that. Let's be curious with it. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much again, Holly. And I look forward to part 3, which will be in a few weeks. And yeah, this is a very big topic, and we're just touching upon the basis of it, right? There's loads more to it. Go and seek out, that really good webinar with Caroline Maguire below. But keep going, because start unpeeling that onion, I always say, because you never know what you might find inside. So come learn, listen, and experience the world through not my eyes, our eyes. Why not? Have a great week. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes? I think this journey will be... Shh.